Today, as you all know, I'm sure, is Rosh Chodesh Siwan. It states in the Torah Sefer Shemot, Perek Yod Toif, chapter 19. B'chodesh HaShelishi, in the third month, which when uses that expression, the Torah and the Nevi'im, B'chodesh HaShelishi, without mentioning explicitly a day, it means the first day of that month. B'chodesh HaShelishi, so on the first day of the third month, Rosh Chodesh Siwan, L'set B'nei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim, after having left Mitzrayim, the third Egypt, having left Egypt on the third month, which is Siwan, Nisan the first month, Iyar, and now Siwan. Bayom Hazeh, on that day, the beginning of the month, Bo Midbar Sinai. Am Yisrael entered Midbar Sinai. Midbar Sinai. It is perhaps less well known that on this day, Rosh Chodesh Siwan, 56 years ago, the Sinai was freed from Egyptian occupation and the Six-Day War on the same day. Interesting to note. Midbar Sinai re-entered our hands at that time. We, of course, in our exceptional folly and confusion, being led by knaves and fools, we of course squandered the Sinai, and it is today, unfortunately, once again in the hands of the Egyptians, who will, without a doubt, use it in some future war against us. That should be absolutely clear to everybody. The fact that they haven't done so yet simply means that it has not been to their advantage to do so yet. It hasn't been the right time from their perspective. But have no doubt that will take place. Many things can only be learnt the hard way, apparently. But it is interesting to note that today is Rosh Chodesh Siwan, and that's what happened 56 years ago. So, being Rosh Chodesh Siwan, we are about to celebrate in a few days' time PRE-SHAVUOT on Yom Shishi, on Friday, which is generally associated with Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. Even though, according to Rabbi Yosef, according to the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Shabbat, Matan Torah was actually on Zayin B'Siwan, the seventh day of Siwan, not on the sixth day. But we don't have to go into we don't have to be nitpickers when it comes to the time or the day. It doesn't actually matter whether it was. It's not essential. It's not critical whether it was Waw B'Siwan or Zayin B'Siwan. It was the beginning of the month of Siwan. It was either that day or the next day. And it's interesting to note that in the general standard Nushaot Tefillah that people recite on Shavuot, they speak about, Ya'aleh v'Yavo, etc., etc. Biyom Hag HaShavuot Hazeh Yom Matan Toratenu. That is the Nusach of Bavel, which is fine, even though, as we just said, according to Rabbi Yosef, that's not absolutely precise. According to the Nusach of Eretz Yisrael, we don't mention Matan Torah. We just say B'yom Hag HaShavuot Hazeh, B'yom Mikra Kodesh Hazeh, B'yom Hag HaShavuot Hazeh. And the truth is that Shavuot definitely has a lot to do with Matan Torah, but it also has to do with other things that are not exclusively to do with Matan Torah. Because Hag HaMatzot, Pesach, is when we left Misraim, when we left Egypt, not when we first became a nation, but when we, for the first time, rose up as an independent nation and asserted ourselves, shall we say. We left Misraim. Hashem took us out of Misraim, but Hashem took us out of Misraim for a purpose. It wasn't just not to be in Misraim. It wasn't a malacha she'ena sricha legufa. It was a malacha she'sricha legufa. It was a malacha that was something that had to happen for a particular purpose. The purpose, of course, was to bring Am Yisrael to Har Sinai, for Am Yisrael to receive the Torah. And that also is not the end of the story. That's only half of the story, because after we receive the Torah in the Midbar, in the desert, as we're about to discuss, then we're supposed to travel with that Torah and enter Eretz Yisrael. I'm not suggesting now, I'm not expressing an opinion as to whether Har Sinai is within the borders of Eretz Yisrael or not. There are different opinions on that question. It's not straightforward, it's not so obvious as some people seem to think that Midbar Sinai or Har Sinai are not within the borders of Eretz Yisrael, or at least not within one set of borders mentioned in the Torah, or more than one set of borders perhaps mentioned in the Tanakh, because there are a number of sets of borders mentioned in the Tanakh with regards to the precise borders of Eretz Yisrael. So I'm not saying the Torah was given in Chutz La'aretz, as some people tend to say. That's not at all obvious. But it is true that that's not the Ikar of Eretz Yisrael. It's not the major part. It's not the essence of Eretz Yisrael. It was not the plan. It was not Hashem's intention that we live in the desert for all time. Yes, Eretz Yisrael does include different areas which are desert. That's true. It also includes within Eretz Yisrael you have areas that are fertile and lush and very productive, and you also have deserts. And both of those areas are part of Eretz Yisrael. But the main part of Eretz Yisrael is the part that can be settled by human beings, that can be cultivated, etc. And that really is what we celebrate and take note of both on Shavuot and on Sukkot. Shavuot, of course, is also Hag HaBikurim, right? When we bring the certain first fruits to the Mikdash, that a person who has certain kinds of fruits that he can that have appeared on the trees, etc., they can bring them, and they must bring them. Hag HaBikurim, Hag HaShavuot, is therefore a time when we celebrate and we note our presence in Eretz Yisrael, our inheritance of Eretz Yisrael, and we thank Hashem for having received the Nahala of Eretz Yisrael, and for having received the Nahala, the inheritance of the Torah. And these things go together, they're designed to go together. And Sukkot also is the other point in the agricultural cycle that we celebrate, which is Chag HaAsif, when the various crops are brought in from the field, gathered in, having been harvested during the summer, then they're brought in at the end of the summer, before the beginning of the autumn, really, before the rains begin. So Shavuot also has to do with Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, has to do with living in, existing in, and living as a Torah nation within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, which perhaps one can take note of more readily according to the Nusach of Eretz Yisrael, where we just say B'yom Chag HaShavuot Hazeh. We don't say Yom Matan Torathenu. Because by saying that, you tend to exclude everything else. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessary and not even correct to exclude everything else. So, having noted that, and having mentioned that the Torah was given to us in the desert, in the Midbar, let us see now source number 1 on the sheets before you. This is a Midrash Tanhuma, Parashat Bamidbar, Siman Wow. It says, "Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe." This is the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar. This is how Sefer Bamidbar begins. "Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'Ohel Moed le'had lachodesh hasheni b'shana hashenit l'setam meretz Mitzrayim lemor." So the Midrash begins by saying, Asherah Moshe, how fortunate is Moshe Rabbeinu. There were all these people that Hashem could have spoken to. Shishim Ribo, 600,000 people. Wahakoanim, Wahalewiim, Wazikenim. There are all these various people that you may have thought Hashem would choose to speak to. Hakol Omedim Sham, they're all present. Umikolam lo nidbar sham ela im Moshe. But only Moshe is the person chosen by Hashem. And this has to do, as we will presently see, this has to do with the unique characteristic of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is that Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Torah states, was particularly humble. The Torah states that Ha'ish Moshe Ano Ma'od. The man Moshe was very, very humble. Ano Ma'od. It doesn't say this about anyone in such terms, more than any other person. And this is an essential characteristic for truly receiving and truly internalizing the Torah. A person simply cannot, it's impossible for a person who is lacking humility, a person who has within him arrogance, who does not understand that he or she is a very small person, very weak, and someone lacking in understanding. I mean, without the Torah, we have no real direction. We don't know in which way to go, what to do. The only way to truly accept the Torah fully, to imbibe it fully, and to grasp it fully, is with the midah of anawa, of true humility. And this Midrash discusses this point as well. So Moshe, first of all, was very fortunate, but we know why he was fortunate. He was fortunate and he was spoken to because he was ano ma'od, he was very, very humble, particularly humble. When Hashem suggested to him that he go to Mitzrayim and Sefer Shemot, he says, no, find someone else. There's someone else better, I'm sure, that you can find. I'm not the person. He's always looking to play himself down, not the opposite. Even when he is attacked, when he is accused falsely by Korah wa'adatho, by Korah, by other people for different things, his response is always very, very measured and very, very very becoming of a person who is truly humble. So the Midrash goes on to say, Hashem spoke to Moshe where? Lo nidbar ela im Moshe, shenemar vaydaber Adonai Moshe b'midbar Sinai. Lama b'midbar Sinai? Why did Hashem choose to speak to him in the desert? Mikan shanu rabothenu. Based on this, the Chachamim stated, B'shelosha devarim nithana haTorah. The Torah was given with, or in conjunction with, three specific realities: Be'esh, uvamayim, uvamidbar. With fire, with water, and in the desert. Be'esh minayin. Why do we say that the Torah was given with fire? Shene'emar, it says explicitly in Sefer Shemot, Perek Yod Teth, chapter 19, Har Sinai, Ashan Kulo. Har Sinai was smoking. The top of the mountain was smoking. Mipnei asher yarad alo Adonai ba'esh, because Hashem had made his presence known on the mountain by way of fire. So there was fire, there was smoke. The smoke of the mountain of Har Sinai was very, very evident, like the smoke rising from a furnace. And all the people saw this and were very, very, very moved and even frightened. It was a very overwhelming spectacle. B'mayim minayin. Why do we say there was also water? The pasuk states in Sefer Shofatim, the book of Judges, Perek Hey, chapter 5, Adonai b'setecha mis'ir, b'sa'adecha mis'adei Edom, eres ra'asha, gam shamayim nutafu, gam avim nutafu mayim. The pasuk, although not very, requires some explanation. We won't go into all the specific explanation of the various words, but it says explicitly, nutafu mayim. There was also rain, there was also water coming down from heaven. So there were unusual cataclysmic and meteorological events taking place at that time. Uvamidbar minayin. And why do we say that Torah was given in the desert? Shneimar v'yedaber Adonai el Moshe b'midbar Sinai. The Torah stresses that it was in the desert. And why was the Torah given in this fashion? To tell you, to teach you. Just as these three things are free, literally. It doesn't cost you money to start a fire. You find some sticks or something and you can start a fire. Fire does not necessarily cost you anything. It's a free commodity. The same is true of water. At least if you happen to have a stream or something like that, it should be. The water is there for all to take, to benefit from. And the same is also true of the desert. The deserts usually do not belong to anybody. It's not productive land, it's not fertile land, and therefore it's usually hefker. It's usually anyone can use it or enter that area, anyone can travel through it. Just as these things are there for the taking, for all, the Torah is there for the taking for all. Shneimar, as it states in Yeshayahu, Perek Nun He 55, Hoi kol sameh lechu lamayim. Behold, all you who are thirsty, go to the water. Wa asher en lo kasef lechu shivru wa echolu. And even if you do not have money, you can go and eat and fill yourself. Ulechu shivru velo chesef uvelo mehir yain v'halav. And you can partake of wine and milk without payment. The Torah is compared to wine and to milk, as we know from various Pesukim and Shir HaShirim and elsewhere, and in this Pasuk here in Yeshayahu. So this statement of the Midrash is telling us that the Torah does not cost money. If a person wants to study Torah, he can. It is possible without. You do not have to be rich. You don't have to be wealthy to study Torah. He goes on to say, and it's available to all. And it's also not something that you inherit. You cannot inherit Torah. You can. Some people are more fortunate than others in that they are born into a certain kind of family, a certain kind of community, society, and therefore they had more ready access to the Torah. That may be true, but if a person wants to study Torah, no one can prevent him. So the Torah is there for all. Depends how much you want it. Davar acher, another point to be made, says the Midrash, Lama bamidbar, why was it given in the desert? Ela, kol mi she'eno ose asmo hefker kamidbar, if a person does not treat themselves, does not act and see themselves as hefker, as something to be trodden on, walked over, and be at everyone's behest, and everyone can go and do as they like with the desert. So if a person doesn't treat himself and make himself very lowly, he cannot literally purchase or achieve or truly grasp the Torah. L'chach ne'emar b'midbar Sinai. And we will explain in a few moments on a number of levels why this is so. But first of all, I want to mention something stated by the Baal Sefat Emet, Rabbi Migur, of some generations back, on this Midrash. And he says, this is number 2, and he says as follows: Lichora shne elu ha-perushim soterim zeh et zeh. We have here 2 perushim, 2 statements in the Midrash. The first was that the Torah, like fire, like water, is there for everybody. Everyone can benefit from the Torah. It's open to all. On the other hand, we're told that you have to make yourself hefker. You have to, in terms of overcoming your ego, and not always demanding all the respect you think that perhaps you are owed, or the honor that you should receive. That is a certain price. That takes work, that takes effort on the part of a person, because people are naturally egotistical. Everyone has an ego. The question is whether you train yourself how to work with your ego, what to make of it, and when to overpower it, and when on certain rare occasions to allow it to come through and to stake a claim for yourself where it's appropriate, if in certain specific circumstances perhaps. But generally, a person has to overpower that aspect of his personality. So on the one hand, you'll say it's open to all. On the other hand, you say you have to make yourself hefker, like a desert. You have to make yourself very lowly, extremely humble, like Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's not for everybody. You can't be both. You can't. If it's for everybody, then it's not only for the very humble. If it's only for those who know how to make themselves hefker kamidbar, like a desert, where people can walk all over you, and people can perhaps make certain claims of you, and not treat you properly. Then if it's only for the person who is able to train himself to be such a person, then it's not for everybody. So the Sfat Emet says, if we have to make ourselves like a desert, we have to be hefker, then it's not for everyone. It's not free. It comes with a price tag. You have to be willing to pay that price and learn how to be such a person. However, the truth is, he says, Wadai Torah hinam. The Torah is definitely free. Mishi yirseh yachol lilmod ba. A person who wishes to learn can open a book, or go to a SHIUR, or whatever it is, and can study Torah. Aval liknoth haTorah. If you will note, the lashon of the midrash was liknoth et haTorah, to truly grasp and take proper full purchase of the Torah, to become one with the Torah. Hainu liyoth lo devekuth ba'etzem haTorah, so that a person, as it were, almost becomes one with the Torah. In other words, a person's essential nature and his essential inclinations are transformed. He becomes a different person because of his connection to the Torah. He is no longer the kind of simple biological machine that every human being is on one level. He is transformed into something else. And that is a function of being davek, truly being davek b'Torah, achieving a certain oneness with the Torah. And that is not something that everyone can achieve. It's not simple. That takes effort, and that takes time, a lot of time, and much effort, and training. So on the one hand, it's free, it's there for all. Everybody can choose to go to a SHIUR, or choose not to, because you have that choice, you have free will, you have Bechira Hoshif. But it's not enough just to go to a SHIUR. You also have to come to that SHIUR, and you have to approach the Torah with the correct attitude. Or if you want to put it another way, you could say without an attitude. You can't have an attitude when you come to study the Torah. You can't have the attitude, you cannot adopt the approach that, well, I'm coming to the SHIUR, I'll hear what the Torah has to say, and if I like it, if it makes sense to me, if it feels good, if it's makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, and it doesn't demand too much, or it doesn't tell me things that I do not want to know, or I'd rather not hear, it doesn't force me to deal with issues that I would rather not have to deal with, then okay, why not? Why would be anyone opposed to such a thing? Yeah. Wonderful. It's lovely. The Torah is a wonderful thing in that case. But if the Torah actually tells you something, Torah, Machon Shilo, it instructs you, it directs you. This is what you should do, but that you should not do. That is wrong. The Torah defines for you tov u'ra, good and evil, right and wrong. Do this, don't do that. And if a person comes to the Torah, approaches the Torah with the idea in his head that I have my opinions, I have my world outlook, my Weltanschauung, I've studied all kinds of books and philosophies, and I'm not going to simply make myself kamidbar, hefker kamidbar, and accept what the Torah has to say, because I'm also somebody, right? I'm also a somebody. I also have an opinion. I also have a view. So just because the Torah says this, well, it doesn't mean that I'm going to accept everything the Torah has to say. That is not dvikut b'Torah. In fact, you cannot really connect with the Torah properly. It's basically like trying to fit in a certain plug into the wall socket when it's the wrong plug. They don't work. They don't fit together properly. Maybe sometimes the pin will enter the hole to some extent. You get a tiny bit of a spark, a tiny amount of current for a moment or something, but there's no real connection there. There are many people in the world who describe themselves as dati, as religious, but really they are what some people refer to in Hebrew as dati lefi da'ati. In other words, I'm religious, I follow the Torah as long as it's it fits my agenda and my outlook and my opinions. So I do what the Torah says when it suits me, and when it doesn't suit me completely, then I don't. That is not Talmud Torah. That is treating the Torah with disdain, like any other chokhmah, like any other book. You can read Plato, or Aristotle, or Schopenhauer, or whichever philosopher you choose, and you can either agree with him or not agree with him. You can be convinced of what he says, or not be convinced. You can be convinced of some of the things that he says. You can think that, wow, Schopenhauer really has some tremendous insights, which, by the way, he did. But that doesn't mean everything he thought was correct.
It's a very depressing.
And he certainly doesn't obligate you. You're not obligated to agree with him, right? If Kierkegaard thought something, it might be true, and if you're convinced that it's true, you may adopt that position or that insight as if it were your own. But you're not required to do so. No one's going to obligate you to do so. You don't have to sign any contract with any particular outlook or philosophy. But with the Torah, there is a contract. The contract is when we received the Torah and we said, Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma'. Right? Na'aseh v'nishma'. We will. First we accept. We do. We will do Nishma means we'll also hear, we wish to hear the explanation, we wish to understand more, but we first of all we accept. This is what we must do. That's the first step when studying the Torah. So if you are not willing to be a hefker kamidbar, not just in the sense that you're, but there's a connection of course, but not just in the sense that you're not haughty, that you're not arrogant, that you don't think very much of yourself, but that you're truly open. You're like the midbar, you're truly open to, and without, there's no fences, there's no borders, there's nothing preventing the influx of Torah into your soul. You are truly willing and interested in hearing what the Torah says. Then you are able to make a real connection with the Torah. And that is what the Midrash says. You cannot truly make that connection, achieve that connection with the Torah, so that you are truly imbued with the spirit of the Torah. And because when you are imbued with that spirit, then many things in the Torah become almost self-evident to you. You almost don't need explanation. It's very obvious to you why it is so. But when you approach the Torah with all kinds of other suppositions, then many things don't make sense. Why should it be so? Why cannot it be otherwise? This has everything, therefore, to do with the willingness, a person's willingness to make himself hefker kamidbar. In other words, I'm opening myself up to the Torah completely, and I will accept whatever Hashem says. Na'aseh wa nishma. But I think it's necessary to delve deeper into this matter, to understand it fully. Why is it necessary for human beings? Why is it necessary for us to receive and to accept the Torah? Why could we not simply know these things intuitively? Why is it necessary for the Torah to be given to us rather than being something that we naturally, intuitively understand? Here I want to introduce a few scientific concepts. Physics, biology, and then a third concept which is not scientific, or it's not in the realm of exact or empirical sciences, the realm of human culture and civilization. Because these are three separate levels: physics, biology, civilization, true human civilization. And what I mean by that will become clear as we proceed. In the world of material things, as we know, we today understand much more. We don't understand everything by any means, far from it, but we understand a great deal more about the material world today than we used to understand. So we know that in the material world, everything is made up of atoms, molecules, correct? That doesn't mean we understand really how atoms interact and work, and quantum mechanics, and it's all very, very nebulous, and basically physics has actually reached a dead end and sort of hit a wall when it comes to these things. But we made a lot of progress over the last 120 odd years in understanding the atomic world, the subatomic world. So what is matter? Matter is made up of atoms, molecules. So let's take water. Water is made up of is H2O, two atoms of hydrogen, one of oxygen. Mix them together, you have yourself a molecule of water, which is wonderful. Water is a very tremendous thing, absolutely necessary for life, but it is not alive. Water is not alive, right?
In a way, you can speak of dead water.
In
a way, you can speak of dead water.
Dead water.
If you take water from an air coat, That's
From?
good
From
Machon.
air conditioner, yes.
Air conditioner. Yes, then that water you should not use for your plants because your plant die of it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, because it's lacking
Natural water.
Yes.
What
Yes.
you describe.
Water is
anymore the minerals problem.
right.
That's it.
Water is an essential element required for life, but it is not alive.
Mm-hmm.
So water exists in the world of physics, but not in the world of biology. Biology is the world of living organisms. What is the difference between matter, atoms, molecules, which are not alive, and a living organism, any living organism? It could be an amoeba, and it could be an ant, and it could be a giraffe, and it could be a human being. We can ask another question: What is life? How do you define life? That's a big question, which has been discussed by many people for a very long time. Let us take the definition of a Frenchman called Bernard, lost in the 18th century, in the 19th century, that life is a system that is self-organizing, that constructs itself. In other words, a car is not a living organism, and it didn't construct itself. Someone had to make it, and it doesn't simply work forever without, or even for decades, shall we say, without somebody looking at it occasionally, a mechanic, a person who knows what needs to be done with it. You have to maybe change the oil, or if it's electric car, I don't know, you have to change the battery, whatever it is. It needs maintenance. By itself, it will not continue to work forever. It's not alive. Life is an organism that constructs itself. How does it do this? We know that all living things contain something called DNA. The DNA is what takes matter and turns it into an organism. It takes matter, which is in the realm of physics, and moves it into the realm of biology. And how does this occur? Or rather, what is DNA? DNA is also matter. It's also made up of molecules, atoms, etc. But it's not really matter, it is information. DNA is information. It's like the software for a computer. You have a computer, it has the top of the line hard disks and hardware, but without the software it doesn't do anything. It's just a box, just a container. It needs information in order to be able to produce what a computer is supposed to do. The same is true of a living organism. The DNA, which is information, is what instructs, it instructs and it codes for the production of certain proteins, which then have to be formed in a certain way, and they have to fold in a certain way and connect with other things, and they construct microscopic machines, literally machines. Every cell has within it machines. Every living cell in our bodies has, what is the number of cells in our body? I don't recall. I think it's 10 to the power of the 15th or something. An immense number. Each one of those cells has these little machines in it, doing different things, so that the cell will function properly. Those machines were constructed according to the information that is contained within the DNA. Where does the DNA come from? Well, the answer is that it doesn't come from the material world. It's not just matter, it's information. Right? It's very precisely laid out information. 3 billion letters worth of information. If you were to print it on paper, the information, it would be a stack of pages, I I don't recall how many, 100 meters high or something, a tremendous amount of information. Information comes from a source without the system, not from within the system. Matter cannot simply become alive. You need the input of information, the DNA, from outside the system, in order to take that matter, inanimate matter, and turn it into animate matter, into something alive, so a living organism, which self-constructs, which builds itself and maintains itself. Not forever, because nothing lives forever. Every living organism is designed to exist for a certain amount of time, whether it's 5 minutes or 50 years or 120 years. But during that period, it maintains it regulates its existence, it builds it continues to produce what it needs to continue its existence. That information, the DNA, must come from a source without the world of matter. Because it's a code. Code always comes from an intelligence. Right? If you see a text which is clearly encoded, well, then you know that someone encoded it. You know that there's somebody, an intelligence behind this text. It's not just a jumble of letters. If it's just letters thrown together randomly and they mean nothing, they do not contain any information, they do not preserve any information, then it could just be a random collection of letters. But if you know that this collection of letters, such as the letters on this page here in the Tanakh, when looked at together and read by someone who understands how to read it, it conveys information, it says something, it means something, then you know that it's not the result of letters randomly falling onto the page, being printed in a haphazard way on the page. You know that this means something, it says something, because it comes from a source that took information and encoded it in this fashion, so that you'll be able to work with it, to read it, to learn it from it. The same is true of DNA. So the principle is that for inanimate matter to become animate, to become alive, there has to be information, there has to be something which is added into the world of matter from without the world of matter, in other words, from the world of intelligence, which is beyond inanimate matter, introducing this encoded information into this material world, can then create something new, something which we refer to as an organism. That was the world of biology. By itself, it could never happen. Just as nobody would believe for one moment that not just the Tanakh, but also, let's say, Shakespeare. The writings of Shakespeare could not be the result of an explosion in a printing factory. Everyone understands that. There has to be someone behind it who had some ideas, has some thoughts that he then wished to convey to you and managed to encode it and write it down and convey it to you in a certain way. In the same way, the information which leads to living organisms, to biology, it has to be beyond the world of inanimate matter. And it comes from Hashem, it comes from the Creator. It could not come from anywhere else. This, by the way, is the most clear, self-evident proof of the existence of a Creator. And there's no scientific argument against what I'm saying now. There is simply no scientific argument against it. It cannot be otherwise. Everyone admits that DNA is information. Everyone knows that information comes from an intelligent source. It's not haphazard, it's not random, it means something, and it's very specific. So it couldn't have happened by chance, and it doesn't work in a haphazard way. It works in a very specific way, and therefore there has to be an intelligence behind that DNA. Otherwise, it's impossible to explain. There is no scientist on the planet who can explain to you how DNA could possibly exist and work and create living organisms. without a prior intelligence, a greater intelligence beyond the world of biology. There is no such scientist on the planet. No one exists who can explain this. So we've spoken about physics and we've spoken about biology. Human beings are also part of the biological world. We are very close cousins with mice. We have, 26,000 genes, so do mice. Okay? Fruit flies, I think, have 100,000, whatever it is, but we're all related in some way. The difference between various organisms, various species, is real, but it's also not that great. The very small changes, differences in that information, the DNA, makes all the difference. So therefore it should not surprise anybody that a person who believes in Darwinian evolution in a simplistic way, namely that human beings are just like any other living organism, which is entirely true. Biologically, we're all biological machines, we're all living organisms, we all are the result of matter having been formed and having been transformed in a certain way by DNA into a living organism. In that way, a fly and a mouse, a giraffe and a human being are all very similar, and they all have very similar needs and very similar drives. They all need to find food, they all need to rest, they all need oxygen, shall we say, what have you. So if a person views the world in that way and says, well, human beings are just like chimpanzees, on one level he's entirely correct. There is no difference. We're just highly educated chimpanzees, very clever chimpanzees, but we're still chimpanzees. In other words, we have to eat like chimpanzees, and we have to sleep, and we have to reproduce, and what have you. The basic biological existence of a human being and a monkey or a dog are very similar. Very similar. In order to achieve a different level of existence, living in a higher dimension beyond the world of biology, in which we do exist, and we cannot escape that. You cannot fight your biology. You cannot. If a person says, "I'm not going to eat," well, we know what happens if you don't eat. Eventually, you will die. Correct? Mm-hmm. For example, if you don't drink, you'll die sooner. Correct? You cannot work against your biological nature. We live within the biological world, but we aspire to something beyond the biological. We don't wish to live on the same level, on the same plane of existence as a monkey. And we believe we should be able to do something beyond that. The question is, where do you discover how to go about doing this? In other words, where does the information come from? The answer is, just as DNA was information that had to come from without the system, had to be taken from beyond the system and injected into the material world in order to create life. In other words, for physics to become biology. In the same way, for biological human beings to become human beings that live on a plane and in a dimension beyond the purely biological, that requires an input of specific and profound information which is beyond the realm of biology. It cannot come from within the realm of biology. In other words, it cannot be invented by a human being. As Rambam writes in Moreh Nevuchim, you can look at other religions, he says, he's referring to Christianity and Islam essentially, but you could also mention others, that tried to emulate the Torah, Judaism, in different ways. They took different aspects of the Torah, and they tried to create similar systems in some way, but they don't work, because he said it's like comparing a beautiful statue of a human being in marble, which is a work of art. It's absolute genius. It almost looks alive. It's so real. It's so artistic. It's so talented was the sculptor that you could almost think that this marble statue was alive. But if you have any sense, you know that it's not alive. You know that it's just a hunk of stone. If you were to think that you can compare that to a living human being who looks roughly the same as that statue, but who's an active, living, thinking, breathing human being, then you would be a fool. So says Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. Anyone who thinks that our Torah can be compared to these other human systems is like someone comparing a marble statue to the real thing, to the real McCoy, the real human being. Even in physiological terms, the marble doesn't have blood vessels. There's no circulation of blood or oxygen, and no assimilation of nutrients, etc. That doesn't happen inside of a marble statue, obviously. So even on that level, the difference is immense, beyond comprehension, almost. He says the same is true in the spiritual realm. The Torah is divine information given to the Jewish people who live in the biological realm, in order that they should be able to rise above the biological realm, not deny their biological existence. The Torah doesn't suggest that we live in opposition to the natural world. Christianity does, for example. Christianity says that a priest has to be celibate, or used to say, or some sects of Christianity make such a claim, correct? But that is to deny the essential biological nature of the human being. That's not correct. It's not normal. It doesn't work. And we know also the results, the outcomes, the number of young boys abused in various churches speak for themselves. The Torah never directs us to live against, in total opposition to the biological world, but it does direct us to rise above the dictates of biology. In other words, true human civilization, which is Torah civilization, because any other form of civilization is just a highly sophisticated chimpanzee type of civilization. In other words, the basic parameters are the same. The only type of civilization, of human culture, of human existence, which is exists on a different plane altogether, is that which, just as DNA transformed inanimate into animate, so that the Torah transforms the biological existence of the Jew into a plane of existence which is beyond. It's also connected to and within the world of biology, but it's also beyond the world of biology. In other words, just as when DNA codes for a certain protein, and also in the world of matter, everything is free. What is that? What do I mean by that? Free. There is no will. A molecule of water has no will. It doesn't want to go that way or to go that way. It doesn't care where it goes. There's nothing freer in the world than a molecule of water in the ocean. The molecule of water, with the other billions and billions of molecules of water in the ocean, just moves about freely from place to place without any particular direction, without any aim in mind, without any purpose, correct? It just is. That's freedom. That's total freedom. No direction, no purpose, no laws which limit the action or the movement of that molecule of water. But life is different. When you wish to take matter and turn it into a living organism, then you have to limit its movement. In other words, the protein has to be folded in a certain way. It's free. The matter always moves freely until you until something stops it from moving, right? In other words, if I kick a ball on the floor here with my foot, it will roll until eventually it stops rolling. But if you put a wall in its way before it stops rolling, then it will stop, because you created an obstruction, and you therefore also limited its movement, correct? Another example, if you take a gun and you fire it, the bullet comes out through the end of the barrel, correct? Same is true of a tank shell or an artillery shell, it's all the same. How does that work? There's an explosion, a certain chemical compound is caused to explode. This releases certain gases at very high pressure. And now what happens? Where does that gas want to go? It doesn't have a will. It doesn't care where it goes. It will go where it can. So it tries to go out this way and in all directions, but it can't, because there's a barrel. And it's constricted. It's restricted. It cannot go everywhere. It can only go in that direction, because there's an opening. So it goes out that way, and therefore it drives out the bullet in that direction. The same is true of proteins in the cell. In all living organisms, the proteins fold and are formed in such a way that their movement is limited. So it's not that it has a brain that it knows how it should move or what it should do, but it's folded in such a way because it was instructed to fold in that way by the DNA, that it can only move in a certain way. So therefore it has a certain movement and therefore it achieves a certain purpose within the cell, and it goes about its business doing that, not because it has a will, but because its free movement was restricted to a particular path. You follow? Before, matter, the water molecule, which is not alive, can go anywhere it likes. It can be here, it can move over there, it'll just move about within the sea and the ocean. No purpose, no direction, no limits, no limitation. But all living systems are based on limitation. There has to be rules that this protein will only be able to fold in a certain way, and therefore will only be able to move in a certain way, and therefore will only be able to produce a certain effect. Not because it has a mind of its own, but because it was restricted, just like the gases in the gun. The gases were restricted from moving in all 360 degrees. It could only go that direction because there was an opening, so it goes there. That's how life works also. Freedom is complete unrestricted movement. Why is freedom unrestricted movement? Where all possibilities are open? Because there's no purpose. There's no particular desire or will. And therefore, the molecule can go this way or that way. It makes no difference to anybody, least of all to itself. But for a living organism which has a purpose, which is to exist, to be alive, it can only work in a certain way, otherwise it won't work at all. It'll die. So the cell has to operate in a certain way, given various limitations that are imposed on that cell or on the proteins within the cell, within the body, which allow them only to function in a certain way. And that's not complete freedom. That's already restricted. That's freedom with restrictions. Right? It's free to move because all matter is always moving, atoms are always moving, molecules are always moving, but it can only move in a certain way, in a certain fashion, in a certain direction, and therefore it produces certain effects, certain outcomes. So what is civilization? True civilization, true human existence on a plane which is beyond the level of the existence of the giraffe or the ant, is existence which is not deterministic, where you have the ability, you have the free will to act in a manner opposite to your biological self-interest. An example: tzedakah, charity. Right? A person's natural biological instinct of self-preservation is, if I have money, I'll hold on to that money. Why? Because perhaps tomorrow or next month or next year I won't have an income for whatever reason, but I'll still need to eat. So I want to save that money, so I'll be able to go to the store and buy some bread, buy some milk, correct? It's against my biological self-interest to give money to somebody else who I don't even know. I'll never see them again. But according to the Torah, if the conditions, the correct conditions and circumstances pertain, you are required to give that person tzedakah, which is against your self-interest. That is a limitation, and that is acting in contradiction to your biological instinct. In other words, civilization is the ability to live not because you are driven by certain biological drives that are rooted in your biological being and in your DNA, but to consider other things beyond those considerations, beyond those drives, and act in accordance with those ideas, those values, those aspirations. That is the mitzvah of tzedakah, and that is true of all mitzvot, essentially. It would not occur to a person, in terms of a person's biology, to build a sukkah and live in a sukkah for 7 days. That's not something that occurs in the natural world. We don't see monkeys building sukkot, ants. Every creature, maybe most creatures, need some sort of a home or abode in which they reside, in which they protect themselves, perhaps. But a creature that has such a home, doesn't go off and build some temporary home for 1 week in order to leave his perfectly good, serviceable home over here. That's irrational in terms of biology. Very insistent. So you'll make sure I do count, otherwise the alarm would have been for naught. So that is totally in opposition to a person's biological, physical instincts and needs, correct? In other words, just as in order to create living organisms from inanimate matter, you have to limit the freedom, the complete, total, purposeless, directionless freedom of the atoms to move about at random and do whatever they wish to do, in order for them to create a living system with a purpose, which is to exist and to reproduce, which is the purpose of all biological organisms. The biology does not work for the individual, it works for the species, correct? Because the individual eventually dies. The aim of every organism is to maintain the existence of that species. Right? Ants do what they have to do in order that there be more ants the next generation. The same is true of cats, the same is true of every living creature. You have to limit the complete freedom, which has no purpose, no direction, and produce certain limitations and boundaries within which that inanimate matter will function, in order for there to be an animate organism with a purpose, with a direction that goes from being a cell, which can, the spermatoza and the egg, the ovum meet, and it becomes at that moment a new human being comes into existence, and then it begins to build and itself and build on itself and eventually becomes a human being, and it doesn't stop at the moment that it's born. It continues to grow and to develop, correct? So from the time that you have the fertilized ovum and the time that you have a 20-year-old human being, it went through innumerable stages of self-organization and maintenance and development in order to go through those stages and achieve that point. And eventually it's supposed to reproduce, and so there'll be another generation of such people, and eventually that person will be no more, correct? That's how all biological systems work, and they only can work because they live within a world of limitations where the material of which they are made can only behave in a certain way, and thus it creates a living system that functions. It doesn't work in a random fashion. It works in a very precise, directed fashion, which is therefore limited in what it can do and what it cannot do. And furthermore, it creates itself and maintains its existence until the next generation is ready to take its place. That is the biological world. And for that to happen, for every organism to exist, it is driven by certain instincts, as we said before, to find sustenance, food, warmth, whatever it is, correct? All creatures function only in that realm of being forced to act in a certain way because of their biological makeup. So a mouse has no free choice. Neither does an ant, neither does a giraffe, neither does a chimpanzee for that matter, or a dolphin. Very intelligent creatures on one level, but they all live in that reality, in that world of having to act in a certain way because they cannot act in any other way. They have not got the ability to stop and to think for a moment. Is there something else I want to do and wish to achieve? Is there another set of ideas, values, purposes, aims in which I believe, which override these biological urges and requirements to maintain my existence? No creature has such a thing except for the human being. The human being has understanding, wisdom, and free choice, and it also has the power of true love. By true love I mean ahava she'ena tluya b'davar, true love which is not based on self-interest. And that is also what the Torah instructs us. You shall love and be completely consumed by this love of Hashem, which is entirely selfless. B'chol levavecha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha. It's not the kind of relationships that animals have with one another, where they interact if it's in their interest to do so. If it's not in their interest, they won't. But human beings have that ability, but without the information how to exist in a realm and what kinds of ideas will produce and create a different dimension, reality, and level of existence for the human being who lives in the biological world, without particular information from without the biological world, which is beyond the realm of human understanding. There's no way of inventing such a system by yourself. So you may be a much cleverer monkey than the average monkey, but the monkey has to get food, and it does. It will find a banana, it will find what it has to get, and it will do what it has to do. And you may have developed all kinds of methods of growing food and finding food in a manner which is vastly more advanced than the way the monkey does these things. But it's still a question of finding food. It doesn't change, it doesn't in any way change the basic reality in which you exist. In other words, a biological being that has needs and drives and urges and has to work within the realm of biology. As long as you're dealing with how to survive in the material biological world, you're existing on the plane of any other living organism. But if you receive the Torah, which is a system of ideas and values, of information, like DNA, which is beyond the world of the human being. It can only come from outside that world, which is why, according to the Nusach of Eretz Yisrael, Birkat Torah is Asher B'Har Mikol Ha'amim, Munathanim Torah Min Hashamayim, Hayei Olamim Mimeromim. The Torah, and it's not that only in Eretz Yisrael they thought the Torah is Min Hashamayim. The Mishnah states in Masechet Sanhedrin that those who say a person who states Torah eina min hashamayim en lo chelek l'olam haba. In other words, understanding that the Torah is min hashamayim is an essential prerequisite to being part of Klal Yisrael, and to be understanding what Torah is all about. To think that it's a wonderful system, it's beautiful, it creates wonderful people and a lovely society if everyone lives according to it, but it's just something that very clever people came up with. That is not Torah. It might be a nice system, it may have very advantages and reasons why you might choose to live that way, but it's not Torah min hashamayim. Torah min hashamayim means that it is something which could not possibly have been invented by human beings. It is something that is beyond the realm of human understanding. And that is why it is something that we must open ourselves up to. We have to be hefker kamidbar in order to accept it and to internalize it, to truly come into contact with it, to truly imbibe the words of the Torah, to become one with the Torah, to be davek b'Torah, to liknot et HaTorah. That is only possible with Torah min hashamayim. In the Gentile world, as opposed to a Jew who is obligated to accept the Torah and to live according to the Torah, and Hashem kafa alenu har kirith, as it were, He forced us to accept the Torah because the Torah has to be accepted by the Jewish people. As opposed to that, a Gentile is not required to accept the Torah. He wasn't part of that contract. If a Gentile wants to accept the Torah, he has two possibilities. He can either become a Ger Tzedek, in which case he becomes part of that contractual agreement. He becomes part of that nation that received the Torah, and then he's like the other members of that group. Or he can accept that the Torah is true and it's min hashamayim, but I'm not required to accept all of the Torah, to perform all of the Torah in my private life. I can accept the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. I can accept some of the basic principles and organize my life according to those basic guidelines, and live an existence which is also already on a different level from biological man, but not on the level of Torah man. So you have the animal kingdom, or the world of living organisms, which includes human beings, as long as they think that they're just like any other animal. Because if you train people to think, which is what the world has been progressively and increasingly has been forced to accept and to think in terms of Darwinian evolution. So it's now 100 and what is it? 1850. What was it? 1851 or 1859? I can't remember. So it's 170 odd years or something. It's quite a long time. If you train people to think that I am just an animal like any other animal, I'm just a bit cleverer, then you shouldn't be surprised that you end up with people who behave like animals. And you shouldn't be surprised at the world that we see around us. Why would you expect it to be anything else? Mm-hmm. If you train people to think and behave and view themselves as living organisms like any other animal on the planet, that's what you'll get. So you have that level of that possibility for human beings, which is not a very good place to be at all. Just look around and you understand why I'm saying that. You also have the possibility of being a Ben Noah, which is already a different plane, a different reality, a much better place to be, because then you know that you're not just an animal, and then you know there's a creator, you're aware of this creator, and you accept certain limitations. Again, true human existence is about limiting what you do, accepting limitations, accepting. In Hebrew, in the Torah, we usually refer to as Ol Miswoth, or Kabbalat Malchut Shamayim. People tend to say Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, but that's not actually the correct term. The correct term is Kabbalat Malchut Shamayim. Even a Ben Noach is Mekabel Malchut Shamayim. If he accepts the Torah is from Hashem, and the Torah, according to this Torah, he as a Gentile is required to do certain things and must not do other things, he's already living on a different level. He's not living on the same level as all other living organisms. He's not just a human animal. He is a human being with an awareness of a creator who is accepting upon himself the limitations and the boundaries of the Torah for Gentiles. And then you have the level of the Jewish people, which is, again, a different dimension, where all of our biological existence is subordinated to our desire and our willingness and our ability to overcome our instincts and tell ourselves, for example, on Yom Kippur, I would like to eat because I'm hungry. Your body is telling you you're hungry. What do you do normally if you're hungry and thirsty? You know what to do. But today you're not going to do it. It's not in your biological interest. It doesn't make sense in terms of Darwinian evolution. But it makes all the sense in the world in terms of Torah, in terms of living on a level which is beyond the dictates of biology. If you wish to be a person who is not driven and controlled and completely at the mercy of his biological drives and urges and needs, then you have to be willing to accept all miswot, Malchut Shamayim, which means when Hashem says this is right, but that's wrong, then you know this I will do and that I will not do. Even though I have some biological, physical interest or desire to do that thing. And that creates a new level of existence. That is the level of the Jew who accepts the Torah. And that is what we find here in Masechet Avot number 3. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, B'chol yom wa yom bath kol Yosef mihar Horev. Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon explains that a bath kol is like an echo. In other words, that sound, that idea emanates to this day from Har Horev, from Har Sinai. In other words, the giving of the Torah was a kol gadol v'lo yasaf, v'lo pasak. It doesn't end. Then the Torah says, machrezet, and says, Oy lahem labrioth mi'albona shel Torah. The Torah was given to you people, to the Jewish people. And if you disregard it, you disdain it, you don't bother to take it seriously, then that is a very, very serious thing. You are insulting the Torah and he who gave the Torah. Shekol mi she'eno osek b'Torah, he who does not regularly, constantly study and imbibe Torah, nikra nazuf. The word nazuf basically means something to be disdained, something to be shunned. Shne'emar, as the pasuk says in Mishle Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11, Nezem zahav ba'af hazir, isha yafa v'sarath to'am. In other words, if you take a beautiful ring of gold, the highest quality gold, and you place it in the nose, in the snout of a pig, which is always burrowing and filthy and disgusting, no one is going to say what a beautiful ring that is and what a beautiful pig this is. No, people will say what a waste that this beautiful ornament, this beautiful piece of gold jewelry is placed in the snout of a swine, because that's the last place it should be. It's a total waste, and also means the person who placed it there has no understanding of what that beautiful gold ring is. Correct? He has no appreciation and doesn't deserve it. And the same is true, the pasuk says, Isha yafa, a beautiful woman who is sarath ta'am, who however is lacking in understanding as to how she should behave, how she should act. For example, a woman who is very beautiful, very comely, attractive, who dresses in a very immodest way, That's an isha yafa with sarath ta'am. But because she acts in such a fashion, she is to be shunned. Her beauty is to be disregarded, because it's being totally misused, and she doesn't understand how she should make, where it's appropriate for that, for her beauty to shine through, how she should present herself in different situations, in public and not in public. So such a woman is a sarath ta'am. She lacks understanding completely, no appreciation at all of how she should behave. So that beauty, as it were, was squandered on her. It's a waste. It's even detrimental. It will lead people astray. Furthermore, this is in Masechet Avot Perek Shishi, the additional perek which was added to the Mishnah of Masechet Avot. So this is a kind of baraitha. Wa'omer wa'haluhoth ma'aseh Elohim hema. The luhoth, the tablets of stone that Moshe Rabbeinu received, were created by Hashem. Ma'aseh Elohim hema. They're not the action. They're not the doing of man. They're the doing of Hashem. Wa'michtav, and the letters, the writing. Michtav Elohim hu. It is the writing created by Hashem on those stones. Haruth, engraved ala luhoth, on the stones, on the tablets. Al tikra haruth ela heruth. Read the word. You could read the word haruth if you change the vowel under the het from a qames to a sereh. Instead of haruth, it would be heruth, which means, what does heruth mean?
Freedom.
Not exactly. Close.
Liberty.
Complete autonomous liberty. That's heruth. A ben horin, as we says now. She'en lacha ben horin ela mi she'osek b'tamud Torah. Now what is that? How can that possibly be? A ben horin is a person who, he can't eat pork because the Torah says it's asur. He can't eat crab meat because the Torah says it's asur. It's very tasty, so I'm told. I don't know, but I understand. So there's everyone says, all those who eat it say it's fantastic, but he can't eat it. So who's free here? The non-Jew who can eat the crab meat, or the Jew who's not allowed to even look at it, not even come near it? Anyone would say the Jew is restricted. He's not a free man. Mm-hmm. But the truth is quite the opposite. Kol mi she'osek b'Torah tadir. He who is constantly involved in Torah, hareze mit'aleh. He ascends to a higher level. As the pasuk says, u'imatana, which is a reference, which is understood here in the drasha to be a reference to the Torah. Matan Torah mi matana nahaliel. You receive this nahala from Hashem. Nahaliel, or bi nahaliel bamoth. Bamoth is a high place, a high place. In other words, what does this baraitha state? This baraitha states, if you want hofesh, you want to be free in the same sense that the molecule of water in the ocean is free to go wherever it wants to go, then that means you want to live on the same plane, the same dimension of reality and existence as any living organism, like a chimpanzee. It acts in accordance with its biological imperatives and drives and instincts, and is therefore not free. It's driven to do what it does. It must act in a certain way. It cannot choose to act differently. And that is not heruth, that is not a ben horin. He has hofesh. He can move this way, he can go that way, but he's always driven to look for food, to look for a mate, to find a place to protect himself from the weather. So he has freedom of movement, but he hasn't got freedom of choice. Only a ben horin has freedom of choice. In other words, only a ben horin really delineates for himself, creates for himself the type of existence that he wishes to have for himself, by being able to overcome and override his biological instincts and nature, and sometimes acting even against his own biological nature. And that's what the Torah is all about. The Torah limits us, it sets boundaries and limits, and it directs us to act in a certain way and not to act in another way. This is right, this is wrong. And it doesn't ask you whether you agree. The Torah tells you this is right and this is wrong. You don't have to agree. It just is. And if you accept that, and a Jew is chayav, is required to accept that, then you are no longer living on the level of the animal, of the chimpanzee, or the dolphin, or the giraffe, who do not have any choice or do not have any real will. They are forced to live and act and behave in a certain way until they die. A human being can place himself on a different level, but only through the Torah, which is min hashamayim, because by himself he could never have come up with this system. We would invented a system of ideas and principles and miswot, of actions, which instill and inculcate within him a certain understanding and appreciation and a certain ability to get out of himself and go beyond himself, to be someone greater than a biological being, a solely biological being. And that is the life of a Jew, of a Torah Jew. And that is a Ben Horin. So that is Heruth. Heruth is complete, independent action and way of life that you chose to accept, where this involves accepting limitations and restrictions. And only then can you have truly human or Jewish civilization. And that is a level of existence and culture and civilization which is beyond all other forms of life on this planet, whether they be lower life forms in the animal kingdom or even human life forms, because they are still living according to the natural biological impulses and nothing beyond that. Whereas the Torah Jew is trained and expected to exist on a higher plane, by accepting restrictions, by accepting obligations, by accepting discipline. These are some of the ideas and the thoughts that we should contemplate in these days leading up to Shavuot, B'ezrat Hashem. Yehi ratzon שנדע לשמוע בכל יום ויום את הבת קול, that we should hear every day the בת קול from הר חורב שאומרת אוי להם לבריות מעל בונו של תורה. May we always be בני חורין שעוסקים בתורה תדיר. Amen. כן יהי רצון.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.